Thank you so much, Ariella, and it's really an honor for me just to share a few very brief words of introduction. You know, Ariella, we also waited a long time for Rav Danny to return.
Okay.
We were very happy for Rav Danny and Altair to be in Melbourne. They did, as a relatively young rabbi, far beyond their years. The job that they did in Melbourne, a secret, when I left South Africa 7 years ago, I tried with every fibre in my being to bring Rabbi Danny Mirvis to replace me in South Africa. But he had already committed to Melbourne. That didn't deter me, but unfortunately for South Africa and fortunately for Melbourne, Altair and Rav Danny went to Melbourne and did an unbelievable job over there. And thank you to you, because Rav Danny and Altair could have played an ongoing transformative role in Australia. But the moment we got a sense that it's time for them to come back, we didn't let Rav Danny out of our sights. He had lots of options, and I knew that we want somebody of the caliber of Rav Danny to work with me and with us at Mizrachi. So we all are, anyone who's involved in any enterprise knows the success of any enterprise is about the quality of the people. It all begins with the people. And having somebody of Rav Danny's quality working with us was something that we were not going to let go. I missed it out in South Africa, Rav Danny, and I wasn't going to miss out again. And I'm really glad that you and Altair came back. Ariella and Charles, thank you. And it's an honor and privilege to be working with you, and I look forward. The last 2 months have been just unbelievable, and I just hope and pray that Bezrat Hashem, for years and decades to come together, we're able to play the best role that we can play to be Shlichim of Hashem, of the Jewish people, of the land and state of Israel, the Torah of Israel. And a big round of applause and welcome to Rav Danny and Altair back to Israel. I also felt enormously privileged. As soon as I met Ariella and Charles, we had a few l'chaims after. It was a brief meeting with you, Ariella, but Charles and I stayed behind, and we did some good damage. And I really felt like friends of a long time. And I have to tell you, I felt exactly the same thing. I saw it before Lachsania too, that you're hosting with your father at the privileged meeting. Nono, where's Nono? Yeah, Nono. So Nono and I chatted, and in the few minutes that I chatted to Nono, I think the story of your family is really the story of the Jewish people and what we're all doing here. Just Nono told me in the brief few minutes about the family background of the Buchalters from Vienna, who made in the 1840s, on the way via Istanbul, stopped in Damascus and met the Tabuls, and the whole family background. And you just go through the rest of your family background. It's the story of Kibbutz Galuyot. It's the story of the Jewish people. Vienna, Istanbul, Damascus, and on it goes. And here we are in Caesarea. And I know, Charles, when you and Ariella decided to make Aliyah 13, 14, 15 years ago, your entire family followed, and you're all in this area. I know with your sister in Yerushalayim, but one person makes the move, and the family's together in close proximity. And if I had to go through the people in this room, this is the story of the Jewish people, the story of the Jewish people, every place of the Galut we come from, and in this room really is the story of the Jewish people. And what a story it is. What a privilege we have. As you introduced Michael Eisenberg as a Zionist, he's so much more. But of course. To be a Zionist, and you said more than that, a father, so much more, and a Yeshivat Har Etzion, and so much more. But to be a Zionist, to be here in Herzl Pituach, with, as Rav Danny was driving me through, embassy after embassy, who would it be? The Russian embassy, the Japanese. In Israel, today, all around this area, what a zchut and what a privilege to be alive and to live in such an era. Rivals Yetziat Mitzrayim, the greatest epochs of the Jewish people. And what a zchut to be here with Jews from all around the world, trying to build a society together to have the biggest impact it can on the world today. And I really believe that so much is what Michael Eisenberg is about and the book that he has written. It's the story of the Jewish people as we at Mizrachi. Mizrachi is a religious Zionist movement which believes in Jewish and Zionist identity. It's actually 120th year celebration this year, founded in 1902. So many people thought Zionism, that's a secular movement. Torah, that's something, the two, that's oil and water. They don't go together. People like to be pushed to extremes. Are you either secular or you're Zionist? You're religious, you're either national or universal. You're religious or you're Zionist. You're secular or you are sacred. But we know that that's not the case. All of us have a body and a soul. All of us have all of these components. And what Michael represents, the book that he's written, and the Torah that he represents, is taking the best of the modern world, the best of what the Jewish people are about, and infusing Torah into it. That there is absolutely no contradiction between the values of the Torah, the business world, the destiny of the Jewish people. They can all be forged together. And that is our role in life, is to bring all of these things together. And Michael is an unbelievable example. That's so difficult to define. An outstanding businessman, an outstanding family person, a representative of the Jewish people, Zionism, business, all comes together seamlessly. And my final word of introduction is just to say is that the ideas that you share in your book, which we're going to hear about in conversation now with Rav Danny and you about fusing things. I'll end just with one idea. The city of Shechem appears a lot. 3 times in this week's parasha, that's where Joseph unfortunately meets his brothers and he's sold from there. That's where the plan to sell him takes place. 3 times that he comes to Shechem and he comes to Shechem and he comes all in Shechem. And we also meet Shechem in last week's parasha. It's the first place that Jacob comes back to. And Michael writes about it in the book, and he comes to the city of Shechem. Michael speaks in the book about trust in business or lack of trust, how important it is, and how the city of Shechem represented this in different levels. But it's very famous and well known that the sages say that Yaakov comes to the city of Shechem, and what's the first thing he does in the city of Shechem?
Coins.
Sorry?
Coins.
He famously says 3 things. The Talmud says 3 opinions. Rav Shimon Rabbi Yochanan. He institutes matbea coins, a currency, a viable currency. Shvakim. He builds an economic and industrial tashtit infrastructure, and merchatzaot. He builds a health system and hygiene. Because the great Jacob is not a person of Torah who gets lost in the tent of Torah. He comes to the city of Shechem and he transforms. He takes the values of the Torah, of the spiritual world of heaven, and infuses them in the city of Shechem. Shechem was never the same. Vayichan et pnei ha'ir, he encamped in the city. He left the city with chayin. A true Torah Jew comes to a city and doesn't leave people saying it's such a pity that people like this are here. As a person says, thank God for people like this. The city is not the same. And he was able to infuse the marketplace, the currency, the health system together with Torah and be able to transform it. And this is Rav Kook, and I end with this. He says that's what happened. This chibur, this connection between heaven and earth, had to take place in Shechem. Because unfortunately, Shechem in Jewish history, Rashi says in this week's parasha, is a symbol of rupture. Joseph was sold there. What a rupture for the Jewish people. The whole rupture between Shechem, that Michael writes about in the book, between Shechem, the city of Shechem, and Jacob and the sons, a rupture over there. And what is eventually going to happen in the city? Rashi says in this week's parasha, the kingdom of Israel will be broken in the future, in the time of King Solomon's son, Rechavam and Yerovam. In the city of Shechem, it will be rent asunder to the secular Jews, the idolaters, and the religious Jews of Judah. That's not the way of the Torah. The way of the Torah is that when the religious Jews come, everything, the whole city of Shechem is uplifted. And this unity had to take place in Shechem. Because Shechem, the symbol of disunity, of trying to rupture heaven and earth, is not the ideal of the Torah. And this is where we come to bring things together. I want to just say to you, Michael, that is your Torah. We've had such a privilege that we have had in our Mizrachi magazine, have had your book launch with us as well. And so many, you were just at our university campus that we fund in Herzliya with the Botwiniks. And I know your voice is probably hoarse from all of the different interviews you've done. But really, the example that you have of bringing the world of Torah into the modern world, to the Jewish people and Jewish destiny, and to uplift it is such an honor and privilege. It's a zchut for us. And it's a zchut, Rav Danny, that you are in conversation, you're with us and in conversation with Michael. Thank you very much. Wonderful to meet you.
Thank you very much, Ariella. Thank you, Rabbi Perez, for those very, very kind and generous words of introduction. It's great to be back in Israel. It's great to be here with all of you. And we're here to talk about a book. So let's get into it. I echo the kind words of thanks which were said to Susan and Ariella for hosting this evening, and I might come back to you later. But Michael, good evening.
Good evening.
Great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
As Michael writes in his book, everybody who writes a commentary on the Torah does so through their own personal lens. So Michael, you bring the example of the Ibn Ezra, who was a pauper, and that influenced the way he read the Torah, analyzed the Torah, and wrote about the Torah. You bring the example of the Abarbanel, who was a finance minister in Portugal, which gave him a very different view of economics and wealth, and therefore of the Torah. So, just to open up this evening, Michael, what is your lens when you write a commentary on the Torah? Who is Michael Eisenberg, the Torah commentator, author?
That's a tough question. Could you start off with the softball next time? Again, thank you for having me. I'll also just mention one thing about Rabbi Peretz. I met him when he was just getting started with Mizrachi. And at Chata'ai Ani Maskir Hayom, I had very little faith in his ability to get Mizrachi off the ground. I think I said it to you at the time even. And so Kol HaKavod, you've done an amazing job of doing this. Really amazing, remarkable. One should not be miktanei emunah.
If I can just say that, I forgot to say, Michael's father walked into our Mizrachi office today, said, hi, Rabbi Perez, it's Mark Knecht.
No, that's my father-in-law.
Your father-in-law, sorry, of course, your father-in-law. He told me that Knecht means a slave, and he's a slave to lots of things in life in Yiddish. And he said, I just want you to know I've come to volunteer of my time to Mizrachi because of all the things you're doing. And that happened today with your father-in-law. So.
Oh, great.
Small world.
So I write at the beginning of the book that my wife thinks that I see everything through an economic lens. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, for what it's worth. And what I'd like to believe, I don't know if it's true, is that, number one, there's an economic lens because we all spend most of our life doing work. It's not true that we spend most of our life sleeping. It's not true that we spend most of our life with our family. Some people might tell that story, it's just not true. Most of us spend life working and engaged in economic activities. And it's the majority of the day. And by the way, that was true in the Avot. Also, it's true through Sefer Bereshit. And, we find a lot of time the Avot are doing one kind of or another economic activity. And then, in all likelihood, I think that my lens is very colored by my experience in Yeshivat Har Etzion with Rav Lichtenstein, Rav Amital. I tell a story at the beginning of the book. But the reason I ended up in Israel on some level is because of a formative experience in Yeshivat Har Etzion when I asked Rav Yehuda Amital, Rosh Yeshiva, right after the first Gulf War. So it's 1991, right after Purim, the war just ended, and I raised my hand in a room with like 15 people, and I said, Rav Amital, is there a bigger mitzvah of Yeshuv Eretz Yisrael, of settling the land for somebody who comes and lives in an unpopulated place, the Galil, the Negev, or if you choose to live in Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv, it's the same mitzvah? And he looked at me and said, Akol shtuyot, shtuyot shal mamash, nonsense. You need to make aliyah and open a factory that will employ 10,000 people who can earn an honest and decent living. That was like a wow moment for me to understand that a mitzvah of Yeshuv Eretz Yisrael was engaging with the economy, enabling other people to earn an honest and decent living and prosper. So his Torah and Rav Lichtenstein's Torah is definitely another lens. And probably my father, in a meaningful way. He was the first person I learned Torah with. I still have a weekly chavruta with my father every Sunday morning, and which is a tremendous zchut. And my great-grandfather, for whom I'm named, I should just mention this, was a dayan with Rav Kook in London.
Wow.
In the 20s. And he was a well-known Rav in New Jersey then. He moved to America. And he wrote a sefer in the 50s called Or Gulat Yisrael, which has a letter in it of all people of support from Ben Gurion. It's a Torah book called Or Gulat Yisrael. And somewhere in there, I read his books actually when I was a teenager. Two of them are books of Hespedim. They're a little less nice. Maybe in some way there's some torch there. I don't know.
Wow, so in addition to the economic lens, you have the personal history and family lens, and there's the Torah you've learned from your father. You quote your father once in the book as well.
Yes.
In a special place. And there's the Torah of Yeshivat Har Etzion. We are both alumni of Yeshivat Har Etzion. Rav Amital loved that story which you just told because he told the story as well. And I knew Rav Amital. We weren't in Yeshiva at the same time. I was at the later stages of Rav Amital's life. I was Rav Amital's...
It's a nice way of you to say that I'm older, and so I appreciate that. It's very kind of you.
I do that a lot in this area. So I was Rav Amital's official whiskey provider for the tishas, and he got a bottle after each operation, and we had a special connection, and he loved you, and he loved what you did. And I think about him a lot and Rabbi Lichtenstein a lot. But what you've produced here in this book is something rather unique. I've read books about business and economics, just some of the classics. I've read many commentaries on the Torah. I've never read a book which attempts to do both at the same time. To be a commentary on the Torah and also to share ideas about economics and business and finances and society. Do you feel that our Torah is an economic guide and that it has a specific economic model which it would expect us, the people of the Torah, in the land of the Torah, to follow?
Excellent question. I'll start with a framework, which is, if you go to any yeshiva that's worth its salt today and say, what are you learning in Talmud, in Gemara? And the answer is, they're learning the Masechtot of Nashim and Nizikin, which are all about economics, contracts, torts, how you pay. I mean, we don't think about it this way, but getting married is a transaction in the Torah. Ki kachi shisha, the first description in Masechet Kiddushin is about how you buy a woman. Doesn't sound appropriate today, but that's a fact. Swears, shvuot, which is not curses, but rather commitments. And this is what most yeshivot spend their time on. But they think about it in a theoretical manner. And because it's Torah Bavel, Torah of Babylonia, and the Golah, they don't think about how it applies. So that's kind of point one. Yeshivot spend all their day on what are called theoretical economics. Part of the problem is that too few people studying these yeshivot know anything about real business and real economics. So the interpretation is different. There's a chapter in Baba Metzia called Ezeu Neshech, which is about the laws of interest. I learned that when I was 20 the first time. And even, I thought I did a reasonable job learning it. I learned it again 7 or 8 years ago. It was not the same chapter, because there was real life and real interest and real transactions, and I think it's relevant. And I think the Torah is not a blueprint for an economy as much as a blueprint for a real society. And we've kind of lost that. Who was saying earlier, I think it was your daughter, saying earlier about life in Hendon is a nice Jewish religious experience. Maybe. But it's a personal religious experience. It may be a communal religious experience. It's not a national aspiration. It's not an aspiration for a society. And Judaism, in my view, has become too personal. And way too personal. This kind of spiritual actualization and realization is actually, I don't think the Torah is about that in any meaningful way. Go find it. You'll have a hard time. Maybe in Yaakov's dreams or Abraham's dreams, but it's not in the day-to-day life. It's about taking responsibility. And this is what I think the blueprint for the economy is, which I get to, by the way, in book 3, which is out in Hebrew. In Hebrew, I've written Bereshit, Shemot, and Vayikra, only Bereshit, and Megillat Esther. Only Megillat Esther and Bereshit are out in English. Genesis. And I think the Torah believes in a model that goes roughly like this. It could take 2 hours, but I'll give you the 60-second or 90-second nugget. I call it Kalkalat Achva, the economy of responsibility, or the responsibility economy. And it goes something like this, where the Torah believes in private property ownership. That's easily provable, by the way. There was no private property in Egypt. You had freedom, you have private property. And then there's Lo Tignov and Lo Tigzol and Lo Tachmod. There couldn't be these prohibitions of stealing, whatever, if they didn't believe in private property. And the Torah has a specific view of how you make a kinyan, how you own it, which is different than Hobbes and Locke, and certainly different than Karl Marx. And we can prove that. I go through it in the book of Vayikra. So private property is a core element. That means the Torah is fundamentally a capitalist thing, because capitalism in its purest form means you're entitled to own private property, you own it. But the Torah also believes that you're given that right by God. And because you're given that right by God, it comes with responsibilities. And it means that you have responsibilities to empower other people to be prosperous and to take care of them. And that is why the two words used always to describe economic relations in the Torah are amitcha and achicha. Your fellow and your brother. That's not an accident. Right? It's not an accident. Sometimes you have re'ehu, which means a close friend. There's not objective people. And people on the outside, by the way, are called ger toshav. And therefore, what the Torah is advising is, one, we can grow the pie. We don't take from you to move to somebody else, like socialism advocate, etc. But believes your job, like Rav Amital said, is to enable your pie to grow, your piece of the pie to grow, so the overall economy grows. Number two, I have a responsibility for you to enable you to do that. That's why I don't loan you with interest. Why don't I give you a loan with interest? Because I want it to be an investment. We should share in the risk. If we share in the risk, I'm aligned to make you successful. If it's a loan, you're indebted to me. And heads I win, tails I win. That's a bad model for the Torah. We need to be aligned. It's an investment. And by the same token, the Torah requires both sets of people to be engaged in proper pricing. And that's the dinei ona'ar, the halachot of people having to have fair pricing. And it's a mutual responsibility, not like British law says, which is caveat emptor. By the way, that's not Latin, that's British law. And not like Roman law says, where it's not on the buyer, but rather on the seller. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but I think it's a blueprint.
No, and so you, and as you write in greater detail in the book, have a clear vision of what a Torah economy looks like, or an economy based on Torah values would look like.
I say principles rather than values.
Principles, thank you. Okay, so principles looks like. And the book is a clear message that we have to educate the next generation towards this responsibility. We have to build a moral framework. You write in Lech Lecha, a society steeped in godly values. You didn't do the translation there, so we'll change it to principles.
I did edit it, though, yeah.
Okay, or at least aspires towards them, gains wealth and endures. So it's a book with a big vision. At the end of the book, you write how every entrepreneur needs a manager by their side. Every big vision needs somebody who's going to be able to translate that vision into reality. That's the way you read the Yisachar-Zvulun relationship. By the way, when you wrote about Yisachar-Zvulun, I was reading about myself and Rabbi Perez in that chapter. Because Rabbi Perez is the guy with the amazing dreams that you, the great believer in dreams, didn't believe in, and what he's done to revive the Mizrachi movement is amazing.
It's remarkable.
And he's got a great vision for the world. And I am there by his side to help him develop the strategy and the framework to really scale up the business and to turn us into a true global religious Zionist network and movement. And I'm much more aware of risks than Rabbi Perez is. He's much braver than I am. And between us, we have that Yisachar-Zvulun relationship that you described. Now,
it's nice to find two rabbis in Yisachar-Zvulun relationship where one doesn't just take the money and go study on somebody else's behalf.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful thing. That's the meaning of it, for real.
Yeah, so that, and that you develop
That'll
that
be politically incorrect. They'll get me in trouble or whatever. It's in the book.
Yeah. Now,
and yes, I know the Shulchan Aruch says it's okay.
That's in the book as well.
Yeah.
Now, you have your vision for society. But what I'm asking myself as the manager, implementer, whilst reading the book is, how are we actually going to make this happen? How are we going to take the big ideas and vision of this book and actually build the society you describe?
Ariella, I got a request for the next time. I need an easier question next time.
Michael, these are the easy questions. It gets harder through the
okay, thank you. Oh, gosh. Ben Gurion, when he helped draft the Declaration of Independence in Megillat Ha'atzmaut, talked about the land of Israel as a place to the ingathering of the exiles. And he has one throwaway line there on some level about the Chazon HaNevi'im, the vision of the prophets. And we spent 73 years doing the ingathering of the exiles. That's, I think, what we've done very successfully. And by the way, that is an unbelievable accomplishment. There were hundreds of thousands of people here when the state started. We're close to 10 million now, citizens of the country, 8.5 million Jews. We are the fastest growing Jewish population in the world. We are the largest Jewish population in the world. We have a flourishing economy. Flourishing. This is a rich country right now on a comparative basis to the rest of the world. The Yemei Hatzena, as they used to call them, are past. It is stunning what has happened here in 73 years. You know, they've made the desert bloom. We've got our own problems right down there with violence and the Bedouins, but it's stunning. And I think the question is, for the next 73 years, what are we doing? And in my mind, the question we need to ask ourselves is, we didn't just come back here to be an ingathering of the exiles and have an economy like the United States, or like the UK, or like Switzerland. We came back here to have what is a uniquely Israeli economy. We came back here to have a uniquely Israeli democracy. By the way, we have a uniquely Israeli health system. There's no other health system like this in the world, where there's basically a single-payer system with a little bit of private on the side, 4 competing platforms to go do it. It doesn't exist anywhere. And it worked pretty darn well during COVID. That's a uniquely Israeli health system. It's not like the runaway, rich people only system in America. It's not like the socialized version in the UK. Ours worked better. And we should be proud of that. And we need to ask ourselves, what is the uniquely Israeli economy? What is the uniquely Israeli civic square? What does the uniquely Israeli democracy look like? Hopefully it doesn't look like the yelling and screaming in the Knesset right now. And that's the next 73 years in my view. Now, to your point, you're not the first person to ask me the question of who's the implementer. One of the first people to ask me that question is a guy named Jeff Swartz. But some of you may know, he was the CEO of Timberland.
He's also on the board of Gush, or the foundation.
Not to the best of my knowledge, but could be.
He's got a son in Gush.
He had a son in Gush, right. And he has been on my case about this question. And so I hope, and Andrew was hard at work on this. This is Andrew, by the way. He's been unbelievably helpful, supportive, and actually the leader of getting the book and the talks out there. and also responsible for me getting hoarse last week from 11 talks around the East Coast of the United States. So that's okay, it's my fault. Is pushing the same question, and I think we're about to get started. We've already got a blueprint of what an action plan looks like to bring people together to actually build this economy and infuse this. But we have early signs of this, and this is one I want to hit at. You know, my day job is as a venture capitalist, and I'm supposed to look at pictures that have lots of dots on them and try to put them together and what's a trend. So let me help you out. Lemonade didn't grow up in America; it grew up here. It changed the insurance model to an aligned model where leftover premiums go to charity. That's not just charity, that's alignment. This is like not just altruism. This is what Jeff likes to say, market caps, meaning successful businesses, close social gaps. That's our economy. Market caps, successful businesses, close social gaps. That's the Torah's view. Get wealthier, help others be prosperous. That's what Avram did, by the way. Just take a quick story out of the book, and I'll come back to Lemonade. And I'll come back to the story finished. We have a company called Rise Up in the portfolio. Yuval Samet, successful entrepreneur, comes back from 3 years in Sweden, says, I can help Israelis get out of overdraft and be prosperous. Using AI, a bot, in people's WhatsApp, we'll bring people out of minds. And it's stunning. The average person who joins Rise Up is saving, and I'm not talking to you about the people in this room. These are people who are in the army, nurses, teachers, etc. Grow 1,200 shekel more savings per month, 3 months after using Rise Up. They are growing the pie, and Rise Up is making money from this and threatening some of the banks, and they're not alone. You know, Healthy.io, a company started by Yonatan Adiri, former CTO, Chief Technology Officer of Shimon Peres, is figuring out how do we reduce the cost of diagnostic health care on urine tests, which is the number one problem which gets people into chronic kidney disease, CKD, which is, by the way, rolled out across the UK right now by the NHS, by saying we can turn the supercomputer in our pocket called a smartphone into a urine diagnostic device. Don't take 2 hours and go to the lab. Don't wait a weekend to get your UTI treated. Get it done in the comfort of your home. We're empowering people to get out of pain, saving the health system money. This is going on here now. I just connected the dots. And Jeff is pushing us to operationalize this right now, which we're on. I'll just finish the story about Avram, because I think it's important. So Avram comes from Aram Naharaim, Galut, to Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Canaan at the time. And Torah tells us he brings his wife with him, his wealth with him, the groupies, Anefesh Asher Subecharan, and one more named individual. Who's the one more named individual? Lot. What's the one biographical fact we know about Lot?
He's the son of Abraham's brother who died in the furnace because he was an opportunist.
So the Midrash says he died in the furnace. The Torah just tells us he died. What does that make Lot?
He's
An orphan.
An orphan.
An orphan.
He's an orphan. So wealthy Abraham comes to Eretz Yisrael and he brings an orphan with him. Like the Ger Yatom V'Amana, first story. And then they go down to Egypt. Because there's a first economic crisis that happens in the Torah. A recession. There's a Rabbi, Baritz. And Avram goes down to Mitzrayim. And they come back and the Torah pointedly tells us Avram comes back more wealthy and Lot comes back independently wealthy. Gam Lot Alechet Avram, Ayat Tzonu Vakar Ve'oli. And he's able to go his own way. He makes a bad decision. He goes to Sodom. One of our teachers, Menachem Liptak, thinks it was a good decision. Lo Mishaneh. He makes his own decision because he's able, he's capable. Avram empowered him to become wealthy when they were in Egypt. And that is the model for the uniquely Israeli economy.
And I'm fascinated that you call it an Israeli economy as opposed to a Jewish economy.
Right.
I'd like to introduce my friends from Melbourne, Ron Goldschlager and his wife Sarah, who've come to join us. They really do live in Melbourne there.
Wow.
Just visiting. They came all the way for this event this evening to be with us.
It's because you're a big draw from Melbourne, I guess.
Yeah, I ran away and they followed me. And I've seen what Ron does in Tasmania. In Australia, he is a leading voice in responsible investment, in impact investment. I've seen the tears in the eyes of the people who work with timber in Tasmania when they talk about the level of responsibility and the ethics of what's going to be being done there. And Ron is bringing Jewish values to is it the most southern tip of Australia, Tasmania? So almost the very, very end of the world. What can you do in an Israeli economy that you can't do in a Jewish economy outside Israel?
Okay, here's a really key point. I'm not talking about impact investing. It's very important. It has its own role. Much like corporate social responsibility has its own role. That, in my view, can be done in the Gola. You bring Jewish values and Jewish ethics into meetup with Tasmania, America, Chicago. Important. Not what I'm talking about. A uniquely Israeli economy builds different kinds of businesses from the core. Lemonade, to use the example, says something stunning. It says, the business model that everyone's gotten used to in insurance for 450 years, since insurance policy was started being written, I think it was in Italy, is wrong. I don't care that you, Geico or Warren Buffett, take your money. It's good. And give it to charity and the Gates Foundation. That's good. Really good. It's important Warren Buffett did that. God bless him. That's also a Jewish value, to give that charity and make that impact. To align the business model such that when you are in your time of need, meaning you had a flood, you were in a car accident, and you make a claim on the insurance company, if it's Geico, they make more money by making you miserable. And then take those profits and give them to charity. They make more money by declining your claim, like Migdal and Harel and Geico and State Farm and Allianz and AXA. Lemonade makes not another nickel by declining your claim. They trust you as a person and say, hey, look, all the premiums left over at the end, because you didn't fraudulently claim me, because you claimed only what you needed, because you didn't think, go to charity. So if you mess with us, you're really messing with charity, American Cancer Association, whatever it is. That's an aligned business model. We're going to take a flat fee for running the pool. When Rise Up says, I'm targeting not the top 10% of the population economically, but the middle 80%, and we can rise them up and grow the pie, and you, the banks, make more money by lending money to credit-worthy people, but not to credit-appropriate people, and there's a giant difference between credit-worthiness, can I pay it back? Credit-appropriate, will I grow economically from this loan? That's what banks do. They only give money to credit-worthy people, and they make money when you default, not when you grow. By the way, if you pay back a loan early at a bank, they make less money. You're a lousy customer. In Rise Up's case, they want you to grow financially, and they're aligned with that in a fundamental way. That's an Israeli economy. The banks give corporate social responsibility, give money to charity, and save forests and help. And it's good. It's really important. That's not an economic system.
So what is it about this tiny little place in the world which allows us to create this unique Israeli economy which can't be done elsewhere?
Three things. One is we're in a different century. The 21st century is different than the 20th century. Two fundamental differences. And there are more, but I'll just lay out two. Number one, well, I'll ask the question. What is the cause of economic production in the 20th century? 20th century. Manufacturing. Manufacturing. You manufacture with a machine. What is the fundamental productive thing in the 21st century?
The brain.
Who said that? The brain. I got a blinding biological insight for you. Ready? I wasn't that good at biology. Factory, a machine, is a machine. It's made out of atoms, has no blood, veins, nerves. It's also got something else. The brain is connected to your head, and your head is connected to your body, and that body is a heart. So if you want to get the smartest brains to work on the hardest problem and create the most economic output, talk to their hearts. That creates alignment. And most people are good. I realize that the police and the government, the tax authorities chase the bad people. Most people are good. And If most people are good and we talk to their hearts, they'll come work on really, really good and hard problems to do the right thing. That's difference one. Difference two, there's unbelievable transparency in the world now. So customers will leave unaligned businesses. As time goes on, younger folks understand this more than most of us in the room. You're younger, I'm on this side of the crowd. And younger folks understand this more, and they want the alignment of that business. And so they will leave misaligned businesses in droves. So that's point one. The 21st century is different. Point two, Israel is different. We have a language and a culture that is 5,000+ years old and a shared story. It's called the Tanakh. Anyone you stop here has the Tanakh. And I got asked on a panel with one of the founders of Rise Up. Said, hey, you're a religious guy with a kippah. She's secular. Well, I have the same thing. And all of a sudden, the guy mentioned the word anthropology. I started thinking about it. I said, Ben Gurion was a genius. He was a genius for many reasons, but primarily because he brought Hebrew back. And Hebrew is the language of the Tanakh. And necessarily language carries principles and values. It's inbuilt in language. That's why the language we speak is so important. And so Ben Gurion, by rejuvenating Hebrew, rejuvenated the Tanakh into our everyday language and our business and economic principles. And that's also taking root here. So that's the second thing. Our thousands of year old story, shared origin story, our language. And then the third thing is the ingathering of the exiles and technology together, which means we've brought friction, people coming from different places, varied experiences, different views of the world at a time where technology is combusting, and therefore creativity that comes from friction gets multiplied by technology and goes seamlessly around the world. And we are one of, this will surprise you, 4 or 5 technology centers in the world. That's it. Other places are trying to catch up. But right now, there's 4 or 5 technology centers in the world. They're not countries, by the way, they're cities. It's the Bay Area, San Francisco, it's New York, it's Tel Aviv, in that order, it's Shanghai, and maybe it's Bangalore. That's it right now. A little bit going on. That's where core technology infrastructure is. That's an unbelievable opportunity. What a responsibility on our shoulders. Holy cow.
And you said before, a couple of times, people are good.
Yeah.
And it comes across in the book how much you like people and trust people. The concept of trust appears a lot. And
I love people.
Sorry?
I love people.
I know, but I'm English. You always have to add a bit of interest to what I'm saying. And in this book as well, it's fairly clear that you're not the world's biggest fan of regulation. It appears in the introduction, in Parashat Vayetze, in Parashat Vayishlach, in Parashat Miketz, and in Parashat Vayigash.
So you really read the book.
Yeah. And this is why, by the way, I recommend people read the book from the beginning to end, because you pick up on the recurring themes, and you see also how there's a certain theme or economic model which is developed in one chapter, but then you read in a later parasha that the long-term consequences of that model may not have been the best thing for the next generation, and you see how you can't just look at a snapshot of one parasha, you have to look at the bigger picture. So you're not the biggest...
Thank you for saying that, yeah.
Okay, so you're not the biggest fan of regulation. You trust people. People are good. Give them the space to thrive and to look after each other and empower them. Now, I found that really interesting because we are both religious, Orthodox, practicing Jews whose lives are so dominated by regulation. And if the Torah was just the book of Bereshit and just the narratives of Bereshit, then I can understand it's a book with nice stories and we take the principles from that story, and we're not the biggest fans of regulation. But as you keep going through the Torah, there are lots of rules there. So how do you reconcile your business approach of being not the biggest fan of regulation to living a religious, spiritual life which has so much regulation involved?
This is a fabulous question. So, 3 things. We come from a place where they always say 2 things, so I'm trying to say 3 things. Number 1, economic regulation exists where trust breaks down. So it is what you call in Hebrew b'diavad. It's not the ideal state. When we've ruined societal trust and business trust, we have regulation. So I believe in regulation to the extent that it comes to fix big problems that are broken down in trust. I don't want to get there. And so I think what the Torah advocates is to build systems of trust. And therefore the question remodeled is halacha, or what you call regulation. Is that regulation, or is that a system that breeds trust? I will argue it's a system that breeds trust. So much so it's a system that breeds trust that for things with capital punishment, like laws of family purity, we trust a woman in the privacy of her own home to make that decision. So much so is there trust, we called a Beit Din, a court that killed somebody once in 70 years, a murderous Beit Din. That's a reflection of trust in the core good of society. We have strictures. I'll argue that this is going to surprise people. Ezra Zuckerman Sivano, I'm actually seeing tomorrow morning, has a great article on this on Parshat Shlach, the end of Parshat Shlach, about the Mikoshesh Etzim. We've argued similar things. He has a beautiful description of it. The Mikoshesh Etzim goes to gather wood on Shabbat. He leaves the camp and goes to do it. This is pernicious for a very important reason. The Torah said stop one day a week from your work because it's trying to put everybody in the same place so that we can look at each other and develop community and understand that community builds trust. And community, and one day stopping at work, also limits on some level competition. But it doesn't limit competition by saying take less or have less. It says, let's do a reset one day a week. When the Mikoshesh Eitzim goes out and gathers wood, when everybody is at home resting, he has broken a social pact. It's a regulation that creates a social pact of trust. And he's killed because if you raid the commons and turn it into a tragedy of the commons, you undermine the basic economic system of trust. And so I think the regulation here, so to speak, is to enable that trust to emerge. And by the way, you see this in many ways. The Torah believes in impulses. There's a famous Gemara in Kiddushin about this. We have natural impulses. We want to succeed. We want to have marital relations. And they're just constrained, not wiped out, for example, like they are in Christianity in many ways. And so we're just trying to channel them to a place of trust and what I would call a modality in which they can find their best expression.
Okay, now trust is another recurring theme and major theme of the book. Rabbi Perez spoke about it before in the context of Shem. How you spoke about there was an aim to build a transaction built on trust from one generation, but the next generation was driven by self-interest, which is where it all fell apart.
Self-interest and deception. They grew up in a house of Lavan the deceiver.
Correct.
They grew up on deception.
Correct. But how can we build trust nowadays when, on the one hand, things are becoming more and more about what each individual can achieve and receive for themselves? It's all about self-interest nowadays. It's moving in that direction. And also, people are working from home. More meetings are held by Zoom. Things are being done online. There's much less personal interaction. How are we able to build an economy on trust when everything's moving in the opposite direction?
I want to answer the second thing first and go back to the first thing. One is, I actually don't believe in Zoom. I didn't make any investments on Zoom, because if I couldn't do this, I'm not investing money. Maybe I'm old. I don't know. Two, we believe in back to the office. Aleph is back to the office. Our companies are back to the office. So we're big believers in back to the office. We think innovation happens in the office and not on Zoom. Three, I'm worried about this all this remote work for exactly the reasons you described and some more. I think creativity happens like this and not like this. Are you on mute? Creativity doesn't happen that way. And it worries me. But I also think there are transitional phases. And I think the younger generation will get better at this than old guys like me. And so they find modalities that work. And so I think they'll work it out. I should have answered this question, the previous why Israel, which is, when I was on college campuses last week, in the United States last week, Israel is different than many Western societies. We have an esprit de corps here, what we call in Hebrew avut hadadit, mutual responsibility, that you will not find anywhere else in the whole world right now. I will argue, certainly not in Western society. The army is a huge part of that. A huge part of that. I chair a volunteer organization called the Shomer Chadash. It's the largest volunteer organization in Israel. I tell you, I go out to see these kids, thousands of kids, spending hours watching over farmers, watching over ranchers, going to pick fields for no money, turning up when Corona started. We had 40,000 people in the fields. Those aren't just kids. 40,000 people came to pick crops because the Thailandis were home for the New Year and because the Palestinians couldn't get in, and the crops, the food was going to go to waste. People LL pilots. I don't know where else that exists. I had a call with the head of agriculture for the governor of Florida saying, how could they implement this there? They had a problem. Get the Mexicans across the border. We turned up. We turn up. We are in a much, 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 much better place than any other society from a mutual responsibility perspective. And so everything in life is relative. If I was betting on someone, I bet on us in this case. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have work to do. I'm not blind. And so what we need to do is bring more people in. So I was at this, I can't say exactly what I was at yesterday. I was at a full day with a group of people at which the CEO of a major tech company in Israel spoke to a group of people who were not from tech. Senior people in the country, not from tech. And he got up and said, we decided that the Ministry of Education wasn't doing enough to put coding into schools. Elena, we got this. And he set up an organization to do that. He said it wasn't enough work to get Ethiopians into the tech sector. On us, they trained 30. They got 30 already working. I'm talking about the last couple of years. In this one company. He then pulled together a group of high-tech CEOs of the fastest growing companies in the country and said, all in, we got this, and we got it. That didn't happen elsewhere. I didn't see Facebook and Google and Tesla getting together and say, hey, how do we go do this together? That's us. And we got more work to do. There's a lot of work to do. A lot of populations we got to get involved, not just in tech, but in this empowered economy, and we can do this.
So, Michael, I think just spending time with you and picking up on your passion and your drive is an answer to the question in and of itself of the limits of Zoom and the reason why we have to meet up and why we have to have meetings like this. And I'll give you an easy question to finish with. You have here an amazing crowd of people, really, really tremendous people in this room this evening. And I think the significance of this event wasn't lost on you. That's why you gave 11 talks practicing for this one. You went through all these interviews just to get ready for this crowd here this evening of amazing, really, really wonderful people with a tremendous impact on their surroundings. If they could take just one message from you this evening to take home. I came to Charles and Ariela's home. Susan was amazing. She put this evening together. I met Michael Eisenberg. If you want them to remember one thing from you, what is your message for them?
You know, your mother-in-law said something to me earlier that I'm going to borrow. I may even put it in the book on Bamidbar, which is coming out. She said, the land has ears. And it hears what we say. And so, when you speak negatively, the land hears it. And this country was built on optimism and resilience. Optimism that the future is going to be a lot better, and resilience that even if we get whacked down, we'll get back up and go do it again. But it was also built by something else. You know what? A band of people that wasn't a government yet, and wasn't the government. And what I tell people in all these audiences, but certainly here, is don't wait around for the government to do anything. This is a civic responsibility. And what the Torah is after, when it says achicha amitcha, is civic responsibility. We are a nation built on civilians taking responsibility and being more optimistic than the naysayers. I like to say all the time, pessimists are journalists, optimists win. or pessimists get headlines, optimists win. If we're optimistic about this and resilient and just decide, it's on us. Like the CEO of this big company, president of the big company, and we got this. We can do it. So don't wait for anybody. You see a problem, an opportunity, a challenge, just say, let's gather up this group again. Let's go fix it. And we can fix it. We can totally do it. And this country admires people who take initiative. Turn up and fix it. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you again, Michael. Thank you again,
Thank
Susan,
you, Rabbi Mirvis.
Charles and Ariella. If I could be so rude as to take the liberty to speak on behalf of the hosts, you're all welcome to please take more food, take something to eat, to drink, and to hang around and to continue to enjoy the evening.
Thank you. Thank you.